Cool. So yeah, welcome guys. This workshop, Introduction to Cypress, it's going to be quite a fun one. I've been looking forward to this. Our previous couple of workshops have been kind of testing related. And you would have seen this slide actually in one of the previous workshops that we did, where we discussed the different forms of testing. So in that workshop, we mentioned end-to-end, where a program behaves like a user would, and it clicks through the application to verify functionality. We spoke about integration, which is to verify several units of work actually working together correctly. And then we started doing unit tests, where we wrote our own JavaScript library to actually, simulate unit tests and testing your React components and all that type of stuff. And then we had a TypeScript workshop where we looked at static testing, where TypeScript is kind of the front line of defense against testing in JavaScript, because it's doing at compile time, it's doing static analysis for you. So we've kind of covered unit testing and static, and now we're going to go into end-to-end, and obviously in the JavaScript realm. But there are a couple of things we need to know. I'm sure a lot of you will know this already, but let's just make sure we're covering all bases. So first off, what is end-to-end testing? And end-to-end testing refers to a testing method that involves testing applications workflow from beginning to end. So you're not just testing an isolated part of your application, you're testing a full flow, and flow can mean the user is able to log in, see the dashboard, add an item to the dashboard, and then log out or something like that, right? That can be an example of a flow, and a flow can be as short or as long as a process as you want it to be. You're not limited, or there's no definition on what you can define as a flow. And then the goal for this method is to replicate real user scenarios so that the system can be properly validated. So I think code and projects are all just theory until you actually have users using them. You think that users might use things certain ways, and you think that this is how functionality should be and this is how the app should work, but you don't actually know that until you have users using it and stuff like that. So the goal of end-to-end testing is to kind of simulate that, and simulate that at velocity and volume that's not a test that a person on their own can't actually do in that amount of time. So along with Cypress, it's not only end-to-end, it's obviously also automation. So automation, that testing involves the use of software that is separate from the software that is actually being tested, to control the execution of tests and the comparison between the actual outcomes versus the predicted outcomes. So basically, you're writing code to test your code. And it's not like unit tests where maybe you're writing C# and you're making use of interfaces and mocking out stuff to test the code, because that's kind of like along the same vein. This can be a JavaScript automation platform that's testing a C# front end, or a Razor front end, or Blazor, whatever, that type of thing, right? So it's a little bit more abstract from the actual core solution than normal unit tests or something like that. But at the end of the day, it is still the actual outcome versus a predicted outcome. So it's, I think X should be true, is it true, that type of thing, right? At the end of the day, testing is still just as simple as that, but it just gets more in depth as we go along. So then what is Cypress, and how is Cypress going to kind of fit in here? So Cypress, first off, is a JavaScript testing framework that aims to be the one-stop shop for all your end-to-end automation testing needs. Beyond just end-to-end, it can pretty much do everything at this point, and that's something we're definitely going to expand on. So that's a couple of things that if you guys do some Googling, you'll find on your own, but I thought I'd just save you the time. So Cypress is its own framework. There are a lot of frameworks that are built off of Selenium, which means if Selenium has problems, which we internally have figured out that there's setup time, there's consistency issues with Selenium. It's also slightly complicated at times, and no, flavoring on top of that is going to solve the core problem. So it's nice that it's its own framework in that way. It's not a flavoring of something else. Then Cypress is written in simple, easy to comprehend JavaScript. So when you're actually writing Cypress, it's very much like pseudocode, that it feels like it's plain English, that you're reading it and it makes sense. It's not complex code, so don't let any of that intimidate you. As soon as we start going through some code, I think you guys will see how actual simple it is. Cypress can be used to test any front-end framework and website. So yeah, it might be a concern that, okay, so Cypress is written in JavaScript, and under the hood, it's just JavaScript. But ultimately, you just give it a URL, you point it to that URL, and it's going to test it. So if you are serving your Blazor application locally, or whatever PHP, Python, whatever front end you have going, you can just give it that URL and you can test it as you would. It manipulates the DOM, the document object model, and that's how it actually goes about its testing. So yeah, it's JavaScript, and yeah, it's a node package, but that doesn't limit us to what projects we can actually, make use of this on. Cypress is written, can be written by, it's meant to be by developers and QAs. So this is like a hybrid thing where, tests were being written by QAs and unit tests were being written by devs, but this is very much something that anyone at any point can do. And that is slightly more agile. At least Clint and I feel that there is no hard dependency on this having to be tested by a QA, or a dev has to go and write this because technically it's code and it's JavaScript, so a dev has to do this. This just allows for a lot more fluidity and knowledge sharing across the team, and that's something we're quite excited about. Secondly, Cypress can cycle through the life of your tests. So basically, you can run the test, and then you can, if there's 6 things that happen, you can actually go backwards and forwards and see how things change through the test, which is actually really cool and super useful, obviously, if you're trying to track down a bug and when that specific bug happened. Cypress can be part of your build. So yep, it's got a very intuitive CLI, command line interface, which excites the devs because it means that we can make a deployment to QA or prod and have all of our automation tests sitting in a part of that deployment. And if it fails, so we've done a whole bunch of refactoring, right? And now normally we would, they know the code's compiling and the code's building, we push that up, and then the testers go, wait guys, this thing is completely wrong, right? Now we've written tests, and while it's trying to build, it's actually going to say, hey, this thing's completely wrong. And it just saves so much time and money ultimately if that's the process. And then another thing is Cypress can record the test runs. So you can run Cypress and it will just go through all the test specs that you've spec'd out, and it can record that to a video, and then it can give you that video. So you don't have to, I know testers sometimes have to record their own video and say, hey, this happened, check 7 seconds in or something like that. Cypress handles that for you. It's just an extra flavoring, but I thought it was pretty cool because then you can just say, hey, the video's there, go look at 22 seconds in, this is what's happening, let's figure it out. There's obviously a whole lot more that Cypress can do. It's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly intuitive, but we're going to have more workshops down the line on Cypress and kind of go into detail on how powerful it is. Okay, cool. So let's look at what we're going to be working with. So kind of just ripped out of the Project Odyssey, which is our front-end templates. We have a login page, and all that we're doing here is we're going to be logging in, going to a dashboard and logging out. So to show you what that looks like, if we say admin@admin.com and we give it some random password, it's mocking out, it's pretending that there's an asynchronous operation there, but that's just a promise with a set timeout. And then we can see at the top here, it's saying, failed to log in, please try again. And all that we're doing is we're just passing through these values to a method that is checking, does email literally equal admin@admin, and does password equal admin? So from a code perspective, it's very simple, but that's not really the point of why we're here. So if we say admin for the password and we say login, it's going to take us through the dashboard, right? So it's basic authentication kind of flow there. And this would be a pretty dashboard with a whole bunch of buttons and more things that you can click around and more things you can do. However, that's not the point of this. So we can then say log out, and it's going to fake another asynchronous operation and take us back to the login screen. So that is the domain, right? That is the whole project that we have to write some tests for. So I think if there are any questions, you guys can ask now. Otherwise, we'll get straight into how we can actually go about implementing Cypress on the project and then writing some tests. No questions? Cool, no worries. Okay, so one thing I must just mention is that I've already installed Cypress. Sorry, guys, your hands up.
Yeah, I just see yours and Clint's camera. I'm going to be that guy.
Sorry, do you not see the screen?
I don't see everybody's camera. I just see yours and Clint's. So I'm going to be that guy and ask everyone to turn their cameras on, please.
I'm going to have to edit this out of the recording now. Thanks, Guy.
Cool, man.
Fuck. Okay. Sweet. Guy, put your hand down. Okay, cool. So I'll edit that out. Okay, so yeah, one thing to preface is that I've already added Cypress to the project. So if you guys are familiar with Node applications, you'll see that they're fuck, Jonathan. No clapping, please. I'm gonna go away from that screen so I can't see you anymore. Okay, cool. So one thing that you'll notice is that Cypress is already installed. The reason I did that is because obviously it's quite a large application. It takes a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to do that first. But all I did was, if I create another terminal here, is that I ran npm I Cypress. Like that's the only setup I've done so far. So don't think I've spent a whole bunch of time, configuring it. I literally just ran npm Cypress and then put that reference into my developer dependencies. So that's all I've done there. Okay, so now we can go over to another terminal here. And yeah, so all that we have right now is just the node module set up for Cypress, but we actually need to start adding some tests and stuff like that. So we can do that, and we can get Cypress to kind of give us the hello world example by saying npx Cypress open. Now, obviously, you're going to need node and stuff, but as developers, we definitely most likely have that installed. As testers, we will start implementing that stuff. What you're going to see happen now is that it's thrown us a little GUI. You can see there's the icon and stuff. And this is actually built in Electron, which is a JavaScript framework to build desktop applications. And you can see it's got a whole bunch of integration tests that it's mentioning over here in a folder called examples. And if we go back to the code, you can see that it's done two things. The first is that it's created a folder within our root called Cypress. And in here, it's got a couple of subfolders, and the one is integration. And you can see there's all of the specs that it was referencing over here. So just running that command kind of scaffolds out everything that Cypress needs, the folder structure and the files, and it gives you a whole bunch of pretend tests that you might want to make use of at some point. For the time being, I'm just gonna remove those. But if we want to look at the other folders that are in here, we have fixtures. This we're not going to really touch today, but fixtures is where you could put mock data and JSON that you might want to make use of, so that you don't have to have it. You can kind of put in a centralized space. Integration is obviously where we're going to put our test specs. Plugins, we're not going to really make use of this either. It's any potential extra plugins you would want to make use of, because Cypress, you can kind of think of it like it's acting like its own application within your application. And then we have support, where we have this commands.js. And now this, you can see over here, this is kind of like writing extension methods or methods to optimize your tests. So if you have a bunch of tests that are doing the same thing or have like the same code, you can actually just abstract that out, throw it in here, and then you can make use of it in your test. So this is definitely something we'll come to. And then the second thing that it did is it created the cypress.json file. So just like we have a package.json or anything like that, this is where we could give configuration and setup and all that stuff to our Cypress application. Are there any questions about that so far? No? Cool. Okay, so let's close all of this. And let's go into our integration, and we can create a login.spec.js. So this is where we're going to test all of our login stuff. We see that this automatically updates. It's got like a hot reload as well. So that's really cool. You don't have to rerun that every single time. So now we've got a login spec, and we can see that Cypress is actually registering that file and that it is there. So obviously you can't just put these files anywhere. It has to be within the integration folder inside the Cypress folder. I just want to throw that down, which just allows us some types and stuff while we're writing Cypress code. So that's a line you're going to see at the top of all of your specs, but you can kind of just ignore it. Okay, so now we're going to actually be writing some Cypress code. And there are conventions, and everyone kind of does it differently sometimes on how you want to name your tests and structure your tests and stuff like that. I'm just going to go offhand, off the top of my head right now. And we will definitely develop best practices and naming conventions and stuff. I'm sure testers have ways they prefer to do things. Please don't hate on me if I'm not doing it that way. Like I said, testing is not my main area. But yeah, we'll kind of take it from there. So the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of build like a hierarchy of tests. So we can say describe. And you can see under the hood there, it's actually making use of Mocha. So Mocha is a JavaScript testing library. So everything under the hood of Cypress is kind of making use of that library. So it's completely, JavaScript through and through. And then whenever we have a description, we give it a title, and that is kind of what, when we run our tests, gives us a structure, so we know what tests fall under which spec or subsection of a spec. And then we give it a callback, which is kind of the, you don't really have to worry about that in terms of JavaScript. It's kind of just the next layer that you're drilling down to. So we could say login page for this, and then we can go down and we can say, we can think of different tests for this. So the first one is that we say when the application launches, as in when we hit localhost 3000, we want it to go to the login page, right? We need to actually verify that it is going to the login page. It could be going to some other random page. So that could be a test that we can do here. So we can say describe on application launch, and we can do another empty callback there. And now we have a couple of different things that that we can do. So we can say cy.url. So cy is obviously short for Cypress, and that kind of contains all of the methods and stuff that we're going to be making use of. So we can say cy.url, and then we can throw in this this URL up here. So we're testing localhost, and that's what I meant by you can see how it can test any website. It doesn't even have to be a website you're serving locally. You know, it can go and test any website because you're really just giving it a URL. So we can say, okay, cool, give it that. And then we're going to have an assertion here. So we're going to say it, and then we give it, we describe that. So we can say should direct the user to the login page. So you guys will kind of see a trend here with the naming conventions. And then we can do cy.contains, and we can say sign into your account, right? So don't hate on me for this test not being the most proper way to test if it's at the login page. I'm just trying to show you the variety of Cypress. So what we're saying here is when, okay, cool, when the application launches, we want it to make sure that we're at the login page. And we do that by telling Cypress to go to the URL, and then we're checking if that DOM actually contains the phrase sign into your account. So if we save this and we check back here and we run this, it should pop us give us another pop-up, and we can see the actual server of our application. Let's see what's happening here. Yes, okay, so we need to wrap this in a before. So kind of see, telling it to go to a URL is not the best way to do that. When you want it to hit something before it actually runs a test, there's another method for that, which is called before. So you say, okay, cool, before you actually run the test, I want you to go to this URL. And I think we're actually going to make use of that quite a bit. So we can actually throw this into our commands, right? Because often, you know, if we're going to have multiple flows that are starting from the login view, it makes sense to kind of abstract that logic out so we don't have to repeat ourselves the whole time. So we could go to commands over here, and I think it's cap because we're using the namespace, and we can say commands and then .add. So now what we've got to give this is a name for our command. So we can say home or go home or whatever we want to call it. Let's just say home for now. And then we just do another callback like you guys have seen the whole time. And we say site.url. No, sorry, site.visit. Visit a URL is used for comparison. And we can say, then throw this in here. Cool. So now we have home there. And now we should be able to do site.home. We're not going to have IntelliSense on that, because obviously it's not a part of the actual package itself, but at runtime, Cypress should be able to make sense of that. Okay, cool. So let's see if our tests are working. There we go. So it happened very quickly, and it automatically, like I said, hot reloads. But if we rerun this, we can see, okay, cool, the login page, that's the scaffolding I was talking about by describing this login page over here. Then we're saying on application launch should direct the user to the login page. And we can see that it's visiting, so it's navigating to that. I apologize, URL wasn't the right method there. It's visiting that, and it should contain sign into your account. And it's showing us, you can see how it's highlighting that specific part, because that's where it found on the DOM, it found that element. There are obviously a bunch of different ways we could we could like double make sure by saying that it has an input field called email address and it has that particular image over there. It has a login button, so you can kind of like add more layers of security. And if one of them fails, then you know, okay, wait, something's wrong here. But that's kind of not what the point of this is. The point is to just show you how to make use of Cypress. But I'm 100% aware testers don't yell at me that there are better ways to make sure that we're actually on the page we think we are. We could check the URL. We could check a whole bunch of different things. And for the time being, I'm happy with that, as loose as that test may be. So now let's write another test outside of this one where we can test a successful login. So we can say describe and sorry, are there any questions so far about how, you know, we made this command and general Cypress stuff? Or is everyone good?
All good.
Yeah, just to mention one of the benefits that you mentioned earlier on around the framework that it uses in Mocha, so that is already an improvement on Selenium, where with Selenium, that is something that you'd have to add to Selenium outside of installing Selenium.
Yeah.
And not coming from, especially from a tester, like functional tester kind of background, that alone can be quite confusing. And like setting up Cypress is a dream compared to Selenium.
Yeah, that's the whole point of it, really, is that it's easy to set up. It's just like any other node package. But also, that's a good point that you raised. Cypress prides itself on being the kind of ultimate package that you don't have to bring other things in to kind of test your whole test spec. You just need Cypress. And I think that's like becoming somewhat obvious here. Cool. So let's test a successful login and a failed login. So we can say on successful login. And we can say before, just go home again. The reason being is because otherwise it will be a part of the same flow. So for this test, they run in order. We don't actually have to tell it to go home. But if the test above it were to navigate to another page or something like that, it will continue the next tests with that state, right? So you actually have to be specific, and you have that control and that freedom to say, actually go back to the home or the landing page or something like that, and then let's take things from there. So I'm just going to say that again so that it makes sure that it's back at the home page in case, you know, this test expands or gets more complicated or something like that. And then we can say it should direct the user to the dashboard page. So on successful login, it should direct the user to the dashboard page. Again, just you're basically saying plain English here. And then how we code that is that we can say we're going to need to get access to the email address field, the password field, and the login button, right? So this is where testers generally have a hard time, because modern day devs on the front end, you aren't really using CSS or something where you're going to get an element by ID. You're not using jQuery where you're going to do that. You have all these React and Angular and Vue, these frameworks that are doing that for you, right? So you're not really adding IDs to your elements. But okay, cool. We need to actually get access to these elements now because we're needing to write a test. So we need to go to our login form, and we need to actually find those inputs. So we can see here that this is the enter your email address. So we know that this is the email field. So we can give this an ID, and we can say login email input. I know there are conventions and stuff about this. Again, we're just trying to keep this as simple as possible. Password, we can do the same one. ID, login, email, password. And then the button over here, we need to give an ID, and we can say login button, I guess. Okay. So now we need to get access to all of those elements and then interact with them, right? So we can go cy.get. And now what get is going to do is it's going to try and get us an actual element. So we can create a string here, and we say hashtag, which means look for an element with this ID. And I think we said login email password, login email input. Sorry, that should be password input. Let's rather do that so it's consistent. Okay, so login, let's copy and paste that. And then we can do the same for the other two. This was just login button. And this was login password input. Okay, so now we've got access to them. Now we want to do specific things in them. So we can say type, and we can say admin@admin.com. And for this one, for the password, this one we want it to be successful, and we know that a user that does exist is with the password admin. And then over here we can say .click, right? So that's going, okay, cool. Get this element, type this value into this element, and it's doing that twice. And then please click this. Okay, and then we can say, we can save this, and we can go cy.contains, and then if we look at the dashboard to see what we can kind of hone in on, we can say the dashboard. So that's a unique thing to that page. Get rid of that. Okay, cool. So let's check out what's happening here. It's happening right away. So let's just run through that. Sorry, can someone just help out whoever's in the lobby there? So it's happening right away, but let's go through it again. This is the whole automation part, right? Is that if we redo this test, we can see it's actually typing all that in, it's clicking the button, it's checking, it's then it navigates us through the next page, and it's checking if the DOM has the dashboard in it. So that test is now also passed. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Do people think that that's cool that we can actually see like the input flying? I really like that part, obviously.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, Harley. So basically, you're making your own ID for the different elements on that page.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's
what happens in the, sorry, Harley, what happens in the instances where the actual test run faster than the page itself that loads?
So that's a good point, is that if you look at this here, right, is that these are happening instantaneously, and then I'm saying cy.contains. It is inherently noticing that there is an asynchronous operation happening after that click, because there is a moment when it is still on this login screen, right? Because I set a 2-second delay on that. So it actually detects that there is an asynchronous operation happening. It waits for that to complete, and then it moves on to the next actual line that you're testing, which is obviously, does it contain the dashboard? You have a lot of control over this, so that you can set certain things, and you can say like only once there's been a change in the route, or only once there's been a change in the URL, which means you've navigated somewhere, actually, then do a comparison or something like that. So you're completely free. A lot of stuff you're getting out of the box.
Awesome. So you don't have to type in like the weights anymore and specify a time or something like that.
No.
Yeah. So that's one of the advantages and big differences between Selenium and using Cypress, is that we don't use the weights, which is a bonus.
Yeah. Cool. So we have a test for a user that does exist, but now we don't know if that's actually working, or for any user or any input it's actually taking the users through the dashboard. So let's write a test for a user that we know doesn't exist, and that it should fail. So we can say on unsuccessful login, again, just take them home, because if we don't, like let's look what that looks like if we don't have that there. And we give it admin, which is a password that shouldn't work, right? Then let's see what happens with our tests. So first one works, second one works, third one fails because it can't find an element with that ID anywhere, right? Reason being is because we're not on the login form. It maintains the state. So that's why I'm just reiterating that the taking it home or taking it back to your base URL or wherever you want this particular flow to start is important. But then you can also see the power of having a full flow, because it's just acting completely like a user would, and it has complete control as well. So it's really quite crazy. So let's say take the user home, and then this, we don't want to check for a dashboard because it's not going to have that, right? So while that part we presume is correct, it's not going to contain a dashboard. But what we do have when we enter a user that doesn't exist is a little toast notification that pops up. It says fail to login, please try again. So that's something that's unique. Again, you have complete control. You can check HTTP requests, you can check all of this type of stuff to make sure that it's not working. But we can do something else here, and we can say failed to log in. Please try again. Now, if we go back to our tests, again, they automatically run for us. First one, you see how it took us back now. It tries to log in, and there we're getting that up top, and it says, okay, cool, failed, sorry. And that's really powerful. But it gets better, right? So that there are a couple of areas that we've thought about how we can improve this. The first is that giving an ID to an element is inherently dangerous because there could be tons of side effects, and the IDs are subject to change, right? At any point, an ID, a developer could change an ID, and you're not going to know about it because they were changing it for, maybe they had to write some jQuery, or you know, they had to do some CSS and they had to get by ID or something like that. So that's what we want to avoid, and Cypress does that very well by allowing you to do something like this, where it gives you a tag where you can go data .cy, and we can say email input, and we can copy, and we can do that for password input, and then we can do login button over here. So the reason for this now is that developers are going to be writing the code, and they're going to see data.cy or sci, and they don't care about that. No, that's testers. Testers are ultimately going to start creating pull requests because they're working in the code base. And then testers can actually go to the inputs themselves, and they're not blocked by developers. And they can go, okay, cool, I need access to these 3 elements. I just need to add this. I go through the same cycle developers do. I make a pull request, and the developers go, cool, that's good. You just did, like, you just touched that part, or you have a QA, another QA on it that goes, okay, cool, you didn't touch any, you know, development stuff or something like that. And now there is no blockage between being able to write tests and if something changes, an ID changes, because then you got to make a ticket for that, and they have to go do that themselves. Now it's completely in the control of the people writing the tests. So if we look at how we can go about getting access to that now, we no longer use this, but in this, we still use the get, but we no longer get with a hashtag, because that's just for IDs. We can say data sci equals email input, and then we close that off with a square brace, and then we can do that again over here, and we say data. Sorry, that needs to be hyphen over here. Over here, data sci equals, I think we said login button.
Ollie, you just got an error on line 20 there. Email dash input, not equals input.
Sorry, where am I looking?
Line 20. Data dash cy equals email dash input.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So if we do that, and we've got rid of the IDs, so we should see the second one work. The third one should fail because it's still looking for an ID, and those IDs don't exist. Cool. So now we can copy and paste this, and we can throw that over there. And then our tests should work because we can change this to a password that doesn't exist. We run that again. Sweet. So our tests are working again. And now we're not QAs are not interrupting developers. Developers aren't interrupting QAs. Developers should not be writing data.sci unless they're actually writing the tests, and QAs don't have to worry about IDs or anything like that. One step further is that we're repeating logic here, right? Is that now we're kind of repeating ourselves. So let's take this out, and we can create another custom method just like we did with home. So we can say,
before we carry on,
yeah,
Bodhi has a question.
Sorry, Bodhi, I can't see you guys. Go for it.
Oh, no, that's okay. I think it's partially been answered already, and apologies if I missed this. I joined late, but does this mean that we could potentially have the tests written at the same time as the devs, or would the testers have to wait for a PR to come through from the developer side before they can start? I mean, is there a way of iteratively passing that stuff back and forth?
Sure. So yes, developers can write these tests while they're kind of doing the work, but developers and QAs think differently, and that's the whole point, right? The whole goal here is that QAs are no longer having to click and actually type, and they are optimizing their time, because if you got a big project and you do a big refactor, or they just say, cool, we want some smoke testing or regression done, you have to think back to 6 months ago when you knew all of the potential things that can go wrong, and you have to do that, right? And that could take, I mean, I'm sure the testers can tell us horror stories of that. So the point of this is that within minutes, it will run. And it, like I mentioned earlier, and you may have not been here for that, it will be a part of your builds as well. So no deployments will happen unless all the tests.
Awesome.
Cool. But yeah, it's up to whatever company or whoever makes use of this to define how we want it done. And myself and Clint, and I think it's quite unanimous amongst the testers, that this is the next step. This is the evolution of testing, and the testers aren't clicking and typing anymore. It is, you're clicking and typing, but you're creating code to test the code.
Yeah, so it sort of goes without saying that this is built-in regression testing. So then 2 days at the end of every sprint just disappears before test is plate.
Yeah. So cool. So just get back to this. What we had over here is that we can move this logic into its own login button, and then we just need to give it an email and a password, right? Because there's no point having this, because we want this to be dynamic so we can make code reuse. So if we get rid of this stuff over here, so now theoretically we should have a login method that is going to take in an email and password. So if we go, and it's checking and it's getting the SCI inputs. So if we go over here now, instead of having the whole bunch of this that we had, we can say sci.login, and this is a working one. So we can say admin@admin.com, and we can say admin as the password. And then we can go get rid of this one, and we can give it a password that won't work. And then we can check out what's happening here. And there we go. We see that it works again. So it's a little bit of like, code optimization, how you guys can save lines of code and have code reuse. There are further things that you can do. Like I said, we can actually take this localhost and we can just have it point to an empty string. And then our cypress.json, I think it's base URL. I think it's that. And now we don't actually have to declare. So when you guys want to navigate and you want to like check a URL, you don't have to go localhost 3000 every time. You can just go /characters or /dashboard or something like that. If we check if I might have closed that by mistake. So run this again and just make sure it's working as we intended. Yeah, we can see it's taking it to localhost 3000 over there. And you can also add environmental variables. So if you have, stuff that you want to set up in environments, you can do that. So again, it's like its own project within a project. So yeah, I'm not going to go into further. We could create a dashboard spec, and we could, test the flow from the login into the dashboard and logging out and all that stuff. I instead just want to spend a little bit of extra time showing you guys what I think is really, really powerful with Cypress. So beyond just having a CLI like you see here, and you can run Cypress and it can tell you if it fails and all that stuff. Cypress also has a cloud platform. So we can see here, this is our platform, and I want to create a new project, and we can call this Intro to Cypress. And we can just leave out the rest for now. It's going to create that project on our organization. And we can see over here that it says, add this project to your cypress.json. So let's go and do that over here. And we can add that over there. Cool, so we've got a project ID. We can kill the terminal method that we had going. And now it tells us, okay, cool, run Cypress while passing the record key. So this is something we might use quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my package.json, and I'm going to write a new script for that. So we can say run. And then, sorry, messing up here. There we go. Now that should work. I think that's all we need to add. And now we should be able to run Cypress run. So if we go npm run script, run. Let's make this a little larger. Okay, so now this is where it would wire into our builds, right? So we would say this, because obviously you guys can look at the actual GUI. So that open command brings you the GUI, and you know it has that whole open serve. But you want to just run the test, you can do this. So now let's see what's happening here. We said run script, and that is executing this command over here, and it's making use of the project ID that we set in our Cypress configuration, and then we have a record key, and the record key will come in a second. Then we can see, okay, cool, it's found one spec, just the login spec.js. Again, if we have 10 specs, we'll go through all of them. And then you can see it's actually giving you time and how long it took to run the tests, and the whole hierarchy that we defined. Obviously, this hierarchy could get a little bit crazier. And then it says it took 9 seconds to do. It gives us the results: 3 tests run, 3 tests passing, 0 failing, all that type of stuff. It's created a video for us, and it says it's done uploading. So if we check out this video, let's open up here and we go to Cypress videos. So we can actually see the whole test suite that when it ran. And again, we didn't actually have to have we didn't actually have to have this going. So that means in our builds, it could be outputting this for us and just throwing it into folders. We don't have to even worry about that. So that's super cool. And then the other part says it's done uploading the results. So if we go over here and we see we're on the Intro to Cypress project, we can see it says it's run on the last commit. So that was obviously commits I did. It's on the main branch. It was run by me. We click into that. We immediately see how many specs there are. There's the login spec, the test results. And then we can see on the login page description under the on application launch, this is what happened. We can check that out. It has screenshots. We can watch the video through the cloud, artifacts, everything. It will tell us if there are tests that are constantly failing. It will send emails if there are a whole bunch of tests, all that type of stuff. And this is happening completely, just by running one terminal command. We're kind of getting this off the bat. So yeah, any questions? Cypress is super powerful. It's amazing, and it's weird for something to be so powerful and have so much to it, yet still be so customizable. And that's just because it's JavaScript, and you can manipulate JavaScript however you want at the end of the day.